at heart, because this is going to be the starting position. So step number one is to go through the facts and identify actions that could be torts. Just like you did here. So I'm going to give you a different set of facts. You've got to do the same thing. You understand what step number one is? So step number one, called the sniff test. In step number two, what we have to do is, based on this, the tort that you've identified, pick one of these, doesn't matter which one at this point in time, and what you have to do is you have to write out the elements. This is really easy because the elements do not change. Every time you're dealing with unlawful confinement, you will write down the same thing for step number two. They never change. They're not fact dependent. They don't. It's always the same thing. So if you've written down the elements, negligence is going to be slightly different. It's a little bit of a more complicated tort. But the basic thing is that if you had the elements sitting on a computer, if you had them written out and you were doing step number two, you could go over, cut them, and paste them, and you'll be done. It's effectively a cut and paste exercise for step number two. Because when you write out the elements, you show that you understand what those elements are to a certain extent. So I want you to do that so you're focused on the right thing. So step number two is going to be take a tort and just write out the elements. I'm going to give you those elements tonight. They're actually on the board, but don't get focused on that right now. We're dealing with process, okay? So I'm going to give you the elements, and then whenever you're identifying that tort, you will take these elements from the board, you put them on the paper, and you're done. That's step number two. Is that going to be difficult for you to do?
No.
No, it's very, very easy. Step number three is where we're going to do the most of the application of the law. You have to understand the rules to do this. And what you're going to do is explain whether each of those elements is proved, in your opinion. So, if we're dealing with these elements, you're going to have written them out, that's step number two. And then you're going to tell me, is it intentional, yes or no? Is it wrongful or offensive, yes or no? Now, you don't know what the answers to these are because I haven't taught you what they mean yet. And you're going to ask, is there contact, yes or no? Is it with a person, yes or no? Is it without the consent, yes or no? So you will explain or analyze the elements one at a time to determine if, in your opinion, it's proved or not proved. I'm going to show you a little bit more detail of how to do this in a higher quality way, but that's effectively what we're going to be doing. Got it? So, in step 4, you are going to tell me whether or not the tort is proved. When will the tort be proved, folks? How do we know that something is there? What did we do before? How do we know when the person was operating a motor vehicle? How do we know when that statute was breached, where they were guilty?
All the elements were met.
Yes. So here, you're going to write out the elements, then you're going to analyze it and tell me whether they're there, one at a time. And step number 4 is basically a summary of your answer. You're going to tell me the tort is proved. When will that happen? When all of these elements, the elements are the parts of the definition, when they're all what?
Yes.
Yes, right? They're all yes, they're all proved. You say then you'll say that the tort is proved. Or, if You find that according to your analysis, one of the elements is not there. What are you going to say?
It's not proved.
The tort's not proved. Why do I make you do this? I make you do this as a bit of a safety net. I should be able to tell what the answer is by what you did here, right? You'll explain whether they're all there. Sometimes students are not clear to my way of thinking, and I don't know. You put down something, and you haven't done a particularly great job of analyzing it, and I can't tell whether you think the answer is yes or no. So what students will often do is they'll throw down a fact, and they think it's self-evident what the answer is. And I can't determine that. So this allows me to sometimes, by knowing what you said here, I can probably go back and take another look at what you wrote there with a better understanding of what you meant. Right? So I want you to do it because it allows me to see things a little clearer if you haven't done things perfectly well. It can help you. Okay? So that's why I get you to do it. So, this is a major step, but it's not over yet. There are situations that I'm going to be talking to you about where people are allowed to commit torts and they can't be sued. Why? Because they're allowed to. There are things that are called defenses. So, if I go over here, I don't want you to explain this, but you probably have a bit of an understanding. Deprivation of liberty means you can't move freely. Against your will, that's not what you want, and it's caused by the defendant. Okay? So, can I have your name here? Yeah. So, if all of a sudden in about 2 minutes, the doors burst open and two big burly policemen come in, they go, "Where's Raylyn?" And they come and they put handcuffs on her and they start taking her out. Well, let's analyze that, okay? Is she being deprived of her liberty?
Yes.
Does she want to be handcuffed and removed from my glorious classroom? Not even a little bit, right? She's quite happy to be here, right? So, it's against her. And is it caused by, is it the policemen that have caused her to have her liberty deprived?
Yes.
Yeah. So, if you went through that, your proper answer is the tort's proved. But they've got a defense. If you sued them, you would lose. Because these defenses are normally complete. In other words, you prove them, that's it. There's no case. So you can't only look at whether the tort is there. We must also deal with defenses. And I'm going to teach you what these defenses are. There's going to be 6 primary defenses. I'll probably even get to them tonight. So step number 5 is to deal with defenses. So if there's defenses that can be argued, there's facts that form the basis for a defense, or some of the basis for a defense, there's enough there to discuss, you got to deal with that. Again, prove it's there, prove it's not there. That's not the point. The point is you have to deal with defenses that have some basis for discussion. And for you to do that, you got to understand what the defenses are. And 6 is again a summary step. It's like number 4. It's just who wins. When does the plaintiff win?
The defendant doesn't show up.
Yeah, something. If there's a lawsuit suing for a tort, when does the plaintiff win?
When the tort is proved and there is no defense.
Yes, you got to have both, right? You got to have the tort proved and there's no valid defense. That's the only circumstance. When does the defendant win? When the tort's not proved, or
defense stands.
there's a defense, or both. There can be both. That the tort's not proved, and if it was proved, there'd be a defense. And the bad news, folks, is step 7. ready? Step 7, let's take the next tort and repeat the whole process again. And you continue to do that till you've reached the end of your list. So if I gave you this fact situation and you dealt with 1 tort per page, you would be taking up 5 pages before you finish this situation. Sometimes students ask a couple questions. They go, what if I know that one of these elements isn't going to be here, right here? Are you listening, folks? You're going to ask it. They will say, can we stop? And what's the answer, folks? No. That's high school, closed book, do you know the answer? That's not what you're doing here. What you're doing here is showing what? How well you've learned the material in this course. If you stop here, and there are defenses, and you don't deal with them, and there's 5 marks in the defenses, but you stopped before you got there because you had the answer, you've just robbed yourself of 5 marks. I can't give them to you. They're not there. You haven't done it. Right? So you never stop the process early. You've got to go all the way through it. And the other reason why that's a big mistake is, what if you're wrong? What if you said, oh man, this element can't be proved, but you don't understand the rule for that one, and you got it wrong, and you stopped there. Now you've screwed the whole thing up because you haven't dealt with the process properly, you haven't dealt with the defenses properly, and you haven't even dealt with the elements properly. If you make a mistake on something, I will still give you lots of marks for what you get right. But you've got to have put it down for me to see it, right? So please don't get the wrong impression that you're after an answer. And when we get into this a little bit further, you're going to start to see. I'm going to give you the law in a very black and white way, even though it's not black and white. Okay? We're going to pretend for the purpose of this course, because you have to have firm ground. I can't put students on waffly ground and expect them to deal with things properly. So we pretend it's firm. The law is firm. Okay? I'm going to tell you the rules. These are the rules I want you to use. So the law is going to be firm. The facts, you can't argue with the facts, they're firm. But every time we try to apply the law to facts, your answer is always an opinion. Now sometimes I'm going to push you to have a particular opinion, but it is an opinion. And because of that, and I've told you this before, but I'm going to tell you again, I can have one person who writes down the answer is no and get 100%. And I can have someone else who answers the answer is yes and get 100%. This isn't math. It's not physics where there's a right answer, right? It's law in which you are giving an opinion. And as long as you've arrived at that in a way using the proper law, I can't tell you that you're wrong. But I can tell you did it wrong. Or you've missed something that you should have put in there. That's a mistake. So I will try to give you situations that I feel are fairly clear, but I can't actually determine whether you're right or not without seeing your reasoning. And that's why you always have to show it to me, and that's why we're going to have a process that's going to make it so that you can. So every time I give you facts, I expect to see all of these steps there. I am going to give you homework at some point in time, probably tonight, so that you can practice this stuff. And I have students who don't. Because they don't have to hand it in, it's not for marks, and they say, I'm just going to cut that corner. I got other stuff to do, and I don't have time for doing that. That is such a huge mistake. Because what happens is, the first time you're trying to do it is on the exam. And you realize then you don't know how. And then you're in trouble, right? You want to develop the muscle memory of how to do this. so that it's really clear to you. And the only way that's going to happen is if you practice it. And I'll give you an opportunity, but I can often tell students who have not done the homework on the exam because they don't know what they're doing at all. They have no basis. It's like they don't understand anything. Okay, so this isn't particularly difficult, but we do have some work to do. Before I move on, does anybody have any questions about anything at all? What I want to do tonight is walk you through things tort by tort. I want to give you the elements. And then I want to give you some rules, some law about these. And sometimes, just like when we had a street or a highway, and you said, oh, that's 22nd, that's not a highway, I have to teach you law so you get to the right answer. It may not be what you think it is. And I got to teach you how the rules work. So it's not enough. I'm basically going to teach you three things. I'm going to teach you a process, which I've kind of done already, but you're going to learn it when you have to do it. So we're going to have a process. We're going to have elements, which is what the torts are. And then we're going to have law that tells you whether or not elements are there or not. In other words, is the answer yes or no? How does this work? What's the rule for determining whether it's yes or no? And when you have those three things, you'll be ready to write your exam. Questions? In a recent course that I taught, go ahead.
Sorry, before you move on. It looks to me like the sniff test is where a lion's share of the work is done.
This one?
Sniff test.
No. I would say that that's probably number 2. But when you see how fussy I'm going to make you be in this one, that's probably the most important thing. So the sniff test is actually pretty easy. When you start to get the hang of what these torts look like, when you see them a bunch of times, you could probably whip through, and you're not going to miss anything unless it's really subtle, right? And I'm actually going to teach you some tricks for dealing with that. And, okay, I have to answer. I have to do something now. Okay, based on your question, because if I don't, I'm really afraid that you're going to get misled. Okay, so I'm going to tell you 2 things. One of the ways that you can avoid missing things in a real life fact situation is, if you have something like this, is you go through it line by line. And sometimes part line by part line, right? Grab them, right? What is that? And then your head should go, is it battery? Is it assault? Is it defamation? Is it conversion? Things? No. Next one, right? So you get absolutely focused on what the fact is that I've given you, or part fact that I've given you, enough so you can look at. And then you go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Could it be any of those? And that usually prevents you from missing things. Okay? If you're actually looking for it, sort of a very small step at a time. And what I normally tell students to do is go through it one line. So in this case, you'd do this, right? I'd read out, Peter was hurrying through a department store with a jacket he'd bought at another store. Is that a tort? Is it defamation? Is it... And you'll go through and go, no, there's nothing there, right? And go on. And that helps prevent you from missing stuff, okay? So if you get to the point where he takes the staple, sometimes people don't see that because they say, well, that doesn't really matter, right? But then if you ask yourself, is that a tort? Then you go, yeah, that's conversion, right? He's taken property, that's conversion. Oh my gosh, I would have missed it, right? Okay, so do you understand what I'm saying there? Is to go through line by line will help you. Especially if you're specifically focused on looking at that. Now I'm going to flip to the other side of the fence. In the exam, we are going to modify things a tiny bit. Just a tiny bit from what we're going to be learning how to do. And that's because I have to have a little bit more rigor in trying to get you to do things a certain way. So when I give you the fact situations for the torts on the exam, what I'm going to be getting you to do is to pick the single tort that fits the facts best. And there should be one. If you get it wrong, you're going to lose marks. It fits the facts best. Okay? So, in order for you to pick that, you've got to understand things. And if you do, it shouldn't be particularly difficult. I do have students who will sometimes screw it up. Okay? If you screw it up, you'll still get part marks for showing you understand the process and doing the wrong tort on those facts, right? You'll still get part marks for it because showing me understand process is worth marks. Okay? Most students, I would say probably 80%, generally have picked the right tort. I haven't designed your exam, so I can't tell you how vicious I'm going to be with it. It's going to be, but in the past, about 80%. A couple students have just gone off the rails and came up with stuff that didn't really make sense. And some are just way out to lunch, right? They don't have a clue what they're doing. And generally, if you're like that, you don't even know what the process is, so it ends up being a mess. Okay. So on the exam, we modify it. We still do everything here. We don't do number 7 because you don't move on. You still got to pick the tort, but instead of picking all of the torts, you pick the one that fits the facts best. If you are going to sue, if someone was going to sue, which tort would they pick from this? And it's not meant to be tricky. It's just you got to know a little bit about what you're doing to get it right, which I'm going to teach you. Okay? Does that answer all your questions? Anything else? Okay. So what I was going to say is that what I have found, I've done recently, and I don't know why, but it seemed to work better for the students, is I have taught them the defenses first. So I think I'm going to do that. At some point I have to teach these defenses. I'm going to teach them. There's going to be 6. Ready? And the reason for this is that it completes the picture. You already have an idea that something could be a tort. You just need a bit of information to fill it in. But most of you have no idea what these defenses look like. It's such a foreign thing that if I can give you that full picture then we can go back in and fill in the rest of this, just give it a little more detail, and you're ready to go. Okay? So I'm going to walk you through the defenses. I have to teach them to you at some point. I think I'm going to do it today. The first defense is consent. But consent is legally tricky. Can I have your name? Spell it. Z-Plum.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, ready? Deepak, can I punch you in the shoulder? I did it. Did you see me? Can I punch you again?
One more?
Yeah, one more. Sure. Ready? That was fun. All right. So, technically, that might have been a battery, right? And you've got to go through the elements of the battery and everything else. But if he sued me for it, I would argue that there's consent. Do you understand that? Now, I want to change the facts a bit. Okay? I'm not going to do this. Okay? I'm not. So let's say I said, hey, Sivon, can I punch you in the shoulder? And you said?
Yes.
He said yes again.
Yes.
Okay, so he says yes. And then I pull out brass knuckles. I put them on there, I load my fist with lead, and I hit him so hard that his shoulder is shattered and he can never use it again. What's the problem, folks?
He said yes.
He did say yes. Did he consent?
Yes.
Yes, he consent.
But the situation is different. You can't say what
I did punch him rather hard.
but I don't think he had consent.
There's no agreement for how hard you punch.
Well, he didn't ask. All right. Right? Did he consent? Folks. No. In fact, if I said, Zifan, can I punch you in the shoulder? And you say,
No?
no, see, yes, that's the answer. You say what?
Yes.
He hasn't consented. You've heard him say yes. That is not consent. Do you know why it's not consent?
Not written.
He doesn't know what I'm going to do.
Well, he knew you were going to punch him though, just not with the brass
You
knuckles.
said you will punch.
How hard?
So he consented to the punch, but not the punch with brass knuckles?
No. Let me explain this in the clearest words that I can. That is a type of consent. It would be called express consent. Express consent is where someone says yes. But there's a rule. In order for it to be valid, in other words, actually be consent, it has to be informed. He has to know what he's saying yes to. And he doesn't, does he? If I say, can I punch you? And he says, okay. Does he know how hard I'm going to punch him? How much injury it's going to be? How sore his arm's going to be? You know, whether he's going to get bonus marks for it or not? Like, he doesn't know anything. All he knows is that he say yes. So people will often think that if someone says yes, that's consent. That is useless. It's completely useless. It has to be informed. So I'm not going to ask you this because it's personal, but I imagine some of you will have an experience where you've gone to the doctors to get a procedure done, right? Where they've had to do something. And they pull out like 12 pages, right? How many of you have ever seen these consent forms? They're ridiculous. Right? And why do they do that? Because the medical profession is so afraid of being sued that they will make sure, and this is basically a carryover from the U.S. system where people sue all over the place for all sorts of things. We don't tend to sue like they do in the States and Canada. And as a result of that, but the medical profession is crossing the borders, talking to people, dealing with this all the time. So we're doing here what they do there. And it's still the right thing to do, don't get me wrong. Because they're saying, when we touch you with these instruments, you have to know. And it's not enough for you to say, can we touch you with the instruments? You got to know what you're saying yes to.
It's a formal consent.
It has to be informed.
But does it need to be formal all the time?
It has to always be informed, which is you know what you're saying yes to. There's been cases in the criminal codes. There's been a lot of sexual assault cases arising out of this, and they have similar rules. And one of them, and I don't know who did this, but two people were having a sexual relation, and one of them, and I don't know which one it was, put a hole in the condom without the other one knowing. And the person that did that was convicted for sexual assault because it's got to be informed. And if you don't know that there's a chance of being impregnated, if you think that, things, that's not informed. Right? So it has to be informed. So when he said yes, you can't say that's consent. It's useless. It's not consent because it has to be informed. So the problem with consent is it's actually fairly legally complicated. And one of the other things that makes it particularly complicated is there are actually two types of consent. And they're both consent. So the first type of consent is what we call express consent. That is, I ask for permission and they say yes. The rule for express consent is it has to be informed. They have to know what they're saying yes to. So, I want you to imagine that you've got a cozy relationship with another person, and you wake up at 2 in the morning and you're feeling frisky, and you reach across to your pre-printed forms, 14 pages, right? And you give them a little nudge and you say, "Hi dear, listen, here's all the things that I'm proposing that we're going to do, how much satisfaction we're each going to get out of that, and how long this is going to take and all that stuff. And could you please read over this 14-page thing? And if you agree, will you sign on the line?" Do we have to do that?
No.
That's what I call a mood killer, right? Classic. So, why we don't have to is because of the second type of consent. This is also one you've got to be so careful with. It's called implicit consent. So, let's use something a little more dramatic, or less dramatic, okay? Let's say that after school you go home. How many of you are going to go home to a partner? How many of you are going to go home to a partner? Okay, so lots of people are going to go home to a partner. That's really good. How many of you are not going to be? Yeah, I could do some matchmaking here, okay? No, I'm just kidding. I'm not doing matchmaking here. All right. Okay, so I want you to imagine that you go home and your partner comes to give you a kiss on the cheek, but you're in a pissy mood, right? I know that none of you would be like that, but let's just pretend that you're in a pissy, and they kiss. Is that a battery?
No.
Yes.
So, have they made contact with you?
Yes.
And isn't it, you didn't really want it because you're in a pissy mood? Right? Is that a battery?
No.
So, where's the consent? It's the second type of consent. The second type of consent is called implicit consent. Implicit consent is where consent can be implied. And there are two circumstances that give rise to this. It can be implied. And there are two ways that this happens. The first is a course of conduct, or conduct. In other words, a history, right? You've gotten a kiss on the cheek every time you come home. It's always been good. There's never been a problem. Great, So when they do it again, that there's implied consent to it. You don't have to say every day, "Can I kiss you on the cheek, dear?" Well, yeah, okay, today. Right? You don't have to do that, okay? It can also be a societal norm. In other words, it's something that people would normally be consenting to, even though there isn't a previous history. And why that's extremely important is, let's say you're in an accident and you're unconscious and you go to the hospital in the ambulance and you're going to die, and the doctor has to make contact with you. He's got to put in a needle and do some stuff and inject you with these things. Where's he get consent from? There's no course of conduct, right? You've never been there before. It's not like you're there every night and, oh, yeah, okay, give me the needle again, buddy. You know, it's things. And can you say yes if you're unconscious? So where do they get the consent from?
Law for that.
What?
Law, maybe there is a law for that.
We're going to talk. This is the law. You're learning that law right now. Okay? So, where do they get the consent from? Yeah?
Is it from location?
The location? What do you mean by that?
Ambulance or hospitals.
Hold it.
Is it a medical center?
No. Medical centers can commit batteries. They do it. They've been sued. So it's not like in every situation. Where do they get consent from, folks? If you're unconscious, where are they going to get consent from?
The societal non-transmission.
It is. And by the way, sometimes students say, well, you get it from the family. This is hooey. I actually don't want my family being able to make that decision. What if they say no? I'm not, oh, should we save them? We got to put needles in them. That's last year's model. You know, get a new one. Right? What the hell? Right? So, in circumstances like that, people normally want to be saved, and that is the consent that they get to use in the emergency ward. What if somebody didn't want it? What if it was against their religion or something else, and they did it anyways, but the doctor didn't know it, and then they sued because of tough. There's implicit consent. Are you with me so far? So, if you walk out in the hall, you will often see these posters that are out there. And I just saw the one I was coming in saying, yes means yes. Okay? Is that true?
It should be.
Not by what you're saying, no.
Not if it's not what?
It's not informed.
It has to be informed, right? So that's actually bad, okay? And they say silence means no. Is that true?
No.
It can. And if you're dealing with college situations, university situations, people who haven't had, you know, a long track history, then yeah, for sure it is, right? Silence means no. But for people who have, that's not the case. But there's an important part to this. Ready? You cannot have implicit consent, implied consent, where it has been expressly removed. You cannot have implied consent where it's been expressly removed. So, even if there's a course of conduct over years, if someone says no, no means no. And the same thing, if somebody goes to the doctor in an ambulance, they're unconscious, and the doctor has to perform a procedure on them, a blood transfusion, and they cut off their shirt and tattooed across their chest is no blood transfusions, Jehovah Witness.
They can't do that.
They can't do what?
Blood transfer.
If they do it, it's a... What tort is it? Say, you're not dying on my watch. You know, I'm giving you the blood transfusion anyways. That would be... And by the way, I don't want to be offensive to anybody. I don't understand some of these religions very well. There could be people out here. But it's my understanding that for the same reason they don't have blood transfusions, they also will not have tattoos. Okay, just so you don't go looking for it. It's the same problem, right? Is that you... And I want to just step to the side. I tend to avoid dealing with something, but I don't want to completely avoid it. So, I don't deal with loss a lot in this course because it just goes beyond what we can deal with. But yeah, I want you to understand that you sue for loss. Torts give you a right to sue, but you actually sue for loss. In other words, that determines the value. How much loss have you had? So if I come over and I don't ask for permission, I just walk up and I go like that to him, I've probably committed a battery, but what's it worth? A nickel? Like, he's not hurt at all, there's no problem. So when we're dealing with that concept of loss, if we have someone that has a religious belief that they will rot in eternal hell if they have a blood transfusion, what happens if they get given one? What's the loss? They haven't lost their life. If they hadn't been given the blood transfusion, they would have lost their life. They've been given their life. What's the loss? It is. It's the belief. So sometimes people will say, well, the loss is that you're going to rot for eternity in hell. Well, if you're going to prove that in court, you have to prove that there is a hell that you're going to stay there. That would be a hard one to prove, right? A little hard. That's like a miracle on 34th Street. You know, is there Santa Claus? Is there? Remember that? You have to prove it. Anyways, so you'd have to prove there's a hell. You couldn't do that. But what you could easily prove is you're going to spend the rest of your life thinking you're going to hell. And that's a loss. They would also balance that against the fact, well, you're not dead, though. And I would not be the one that has to do that math. Yeah? How much is it worth to be alive when you'd otherwise be dead, but you think you're going to go to hell? What's that worth? I don't know.
Isn't that why we limit that type of court procedures in Canada compared to the States?
Canada, you still have to do the math, though. In Canada, I don't know what it's probably gone up due to inflation, but there used to be a $100,000 maximum for pain and suffering. Aggravation. And thinking you're going to hell isn't the same as you're in pain every day, excruciating thing. And that's for the worst situation, it's $100,000. So it's not like anyone who gets close to it gets the $100,000. That's for the worst situation, and everything else goes down from there. So how much is believing you're going to hell? I have no idea. I wouldn't want to have to do the math. So, the other last point that I have to make about this is you cannot consent if you don't have a brain. Any of you been without brain at some point in time in the recent past? Any of you been a little without brain?
Drink.
No? Anybody?
Are we talking impaired or incapacitated?
It doesn't matter. Whatever one, right?